this discussion about the Roman Roads Press Reader's Guides that accompany the Roman Roads Press Classics. I'm here with Joe Carlson, who has written several of these guides for us so far, including the entire Divine Comedy. And we're going to talk about just what they are, what they're for, and who they're for. Joe, first of all, what brought you to, so you're the translator of the Divine Comedy, and then the Reader's Guides actually came after that Divine Comedy project. So maybe tell us how you got started with this project.
So they actually were written simultaneously. They came about, I was translating, I was going through, and to be honest, I was thinking, I really want my wife to know what's going on. So how can I explain things to her in a way that, is at her level? She's never read, she'd read the comedy years ago, but, doesn't make it a habit of reading epic poetry from the medieval era, right? It's not her thing. And so I want to bring her along and help explain why I love this so much. Why do I love this so much that I am taking all this time to translate it into English when it's been translated 100 times before, right? So how can I share my delight in a poem? But not just my delight, also I was a pastor for a number of years before I came back to the academy, and bringing a pastoral emphasis to these works. What do these works? How do these works tell me to be more like Christ? Right? How do these works shape my own loyalties and affections for Jesus? Right? How do these works cultivate an allegiance that I know I need to have, and I need help growing in? Right? Scripture, of course, is our foundation for that, but God delights in the works of our hands as well, especially when they praise and glorify Him, which the Divine Comedy obviously does. So I'm translating this, thinking at the same time, okay, what would be a lesson in this canto that I could draw out? One thing I could point to and go, okay, this is helpful for my walk with Christ. This is helpful for my journey and understanding who I am as a human being made in God's image, redeemed by Christ's blood. And so I started writing little analyses, right? Just little paragraphs, 1 or 2 paragraphs, something short, that I could use to not just with my wife, but maybe in a class as I'm teaching. One thing to draw out of this canto that would help unpack those connections, personal, spiritual walk kinds of connections. And then that kind of developed into, okay, well, maybe it'd be helpful to write a summary of what's going on to kind of explain also not just why this is important, but then actually what's happening. And for the Divine Comedy, that's really helpful because sometimes he can be really obscure, or he includes over 500 names from both mythology and 13th century Italian history.
You mean everyone doesn't know what's going on in 14th century Florence?
Right, exactly. So helping unpack a little bit of that for the reader. And then as I was translating, there were words, there were phrases, there were allusions that were being made to the Aeneid or to Ovid, or something particular in the poetry that couldn't be translated into English, that to have a helpful place to note that, not in any extensive way, but to just point to that for the reader. Go, okay, this passage, there's actually an acrostic. This section is an acrostic poem, right? And you wouldn't get that in English because the nature of translation. And so having a place to point that out. And then I thought, well, I'm already here. Let's have some discussion questions, because this would have a really useful place in a school environment, in a homeschool environment, where a student is walking through this even on their own. Questions to prod thought, to prod investigation, to help the student consider and meditate on what he's just read. He or she has just read.
Yeah, I want to talk about kind of what sets these apart. But part of setting that up is to comment more on what you said about that pastoral nature. One thing I've noticed as we've been looking through texts for Old Western culture and for these classics, and looking at all kinds of different translations, is how many of the often very good translations, but older public domain translations were done by pastors. It'll be Reverend, Doctor, or Reverend, who translate these great works. And it's always struck me, how many pastors do you know? I know a few, but it's rare, pastors who have not only read the classics, but read them and love them to the point of translating them.
Or writing commentaries on
There's so many of these 19th century, in particular, translations were done by pastors, and that's on that. That wasn't a 19th century thing. It was the church who preserved the classics throughout the last 2,000 years. If it weren't for those monks copying the texts, these classics have been preserved by the church, and so it's a somewhat of a modern innovation, or just a part of modernism, that the Academy, are the ones who maintain it. So I want to get back to the reader's guides and what sets them apart in that pastoral edge, but aspect. But the Roman Roads Classics series is a series that are standalone classics, distinct from our Old Western Culture readers, where we want to bring back, along with certain ones that have readers' guides, to bring back the pastoral aspect of these texts, both in how they're translated as well as their commentary.
For instance, you pick up a copy of Penguin's Paradise Lost. You flip it over in the back cover, and a portion of the introduction is represented there, where the guy the scholar who is I shouldn't put scare quotes around scholar. He is a scholar, but the scholar who is writing this introduction is undermining Milton's faith, and is trying to show how Milton himself was undermining his faith in God through the writing of Paradise Lost. And that's just a bunch of hogwash, right? So what we need is Christians writing about the works of other Christians, not doubting their faith, but rather elucidating their faith and how their faith actually led to the creation of these incredible poems, or incredible novels, or incredible works of philosophy, right?
So to put it bluntly, Penguin classics, we're coming after you. It's time to make the classics Christian again.
That's right. Pagan or Penguin, which is it?
Exactly. But that's what we're doing with with these Roman Roads Classics and the reader's guides. But tell me about how that pastoral aspect plays into the reader's guides, as well as just the introductions to the texts.
Yeah. So so here's I have an example of the Paradise Lost, Paradise Regained. You have Paradiso. We have one from Inferno and Purgatorio as well, and we got more coming out. Each for Paradise Lost and Paradise Regained, it goes through each book. So there's 12 books in Paradise Lost, 4 books in Paradise Regained, and so there are 16 chapters in here.
One and in the case of the Divine Comedy, it's canto by canto.
Yeah, right. Canto. So there's 100 chapters throughout the 3 volumes. And the structure of each one is the same. It starts with a list of the characters, the location. So I just flipped open to book 6 of Paradise Lost. The characters are Adam, Eve, Raphael, Satan, Abdiel, and Michael. Those are the main characters in that book. The location is both the Garden of Eden and heaven. And then there's an extensive summary that covers the whole book, what the trajectory is, what the main themes are. That's more of the the statement of fact. This is what this book is. And then we have a section of notes for both the comedy and for Milton. For Paradise Lost and Regained, there's a lot of scripture references. There's explanations of various theological points. For Milton, we are very much of the mind that he was a Calvinist Puritan, an Orthodox Trinitarian, and we make our case in the notes and in the analyses. So then after the notes, we have a series of analyses. For the comedy, there's one analysis per canto. For Paradise Lost, there's 3 or 4 analyses per book. So each canto is a little bit more single-focused than a whole book of the Paradise Lost. So that's why there's more things to talk about per book than there are per canto. And then, so 3 or 4 analyses, this is where that pastoral nature comes out, right? How do we think about sin? How should I understand my own sin, seeing Satan fall and rise up in rebellion against Christ? What should I know about forgiveness in reading about the atonement that is promised in Book 10? What should I think about faithful rebellion against the philosophy of the world, the worldly philosophy, the worldly wisdom of Satan that Abdiel represents?
Right.
And then going through the journey of the soul, either away from God in hell, what sin does to the individual, what sin does to the community, what sin does to the nation, what redemption looks like, what sanctification looks like in all those realms. The 100 analyses in the Reader's Guides over those 3 volumes give opportunity to dive into those questions.
Right.
So that when I read them, when I read the comedy and then I read these alongside, not only am I getting a richer understanding of what Dante wrote, I'm given the means to make actual application to my own life.
Right. And, one of the things we've talked about is in terms of trying to decide what to include in these and how in depth to go is that, especially with computer programs and, now with AI, there's this volume could be 1,000 pages long if you tried to include everything,
every reference,
every cross-reference. And so there's a real sense in which, I've heard the definition that an expert is someone who knows what information to ignore.
Yes.
So
selection is always an art.
You can Google things and be overwhelmed, and you don't necessarily trust the source. This is part of that guide. The Virgil, the guide through the comedy. But these guides through these works is that pastoral selection of pastoral and scholarly selection of what's important. Not every name mentioned in the Divine Comedy, not every allusion is worth. There may be entire PhDs on one, dissertations. And there are exactly. But what is the student? What is the new reader?
Right.
New and 100th time, but what are the things that are worth dwelling on, that are worth paying attention to, and they could Paradiso still got fairly thick here, but there was more stuff to unpack that you felt you needed to unpack, but that's part of what the guide is there.
And again, it's always anchored to the text.
Right.
It's
yes. I was going to ask. This is a reader's guide.
Right.
What are they reading?
Right. They're reading the text.
The text. Yeah.
Right. They're going back to the poem. In this case, they're going back to the comedy. They're going back to Paradise Lost or Paradise Regained. And what this does is come along as that older voice, the voice of someone who has read this poem, enjoyed this poem, delighted in this poem, wants to see this poem enjoyed and delighted in as well in others. And so the voice of the Reader's Guide is to come along. It comes along and points you back to the text, opens the text, illuminates the text, and gives you the ability to enjoy the text with that richer understanding of what the text is saying. So again, it's always pointing back to what the other author wrote, right?
Correct.
Dante, Milton, what have you.
Yeah. So our goal is these are not books about the great books.
Right.
That if the success for us and for our readers is if it makes you enjoy, read first, enjoy, appreciate, and it change and move and form who you are for, reading the actual text, if not about them.
If this book causes your version, the spine of the poem, to be that much more cracked and used, then this will have accomplished its purpose.
Exactly.
The spine on this should stay intact, where the spine on the poem should be falling apart because it's being used so much.
If you read this and not the text, then you missed the point.
Right. This comes and points you back to the text.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, and I look forward to talking about individual texts and reader guides as they come out. But we have a lot more coming, so stay tuned.
Keep your eyes open.
RomanRoadsPress.com, where we will be working as fast as we can to bring you readers' guides and texts in this Roman Roads Classics series.